Hi everyone, this is Plato's Republic, and this is Philosophy 110, Ethics. You're going to be entering into a world of ancient Greek philosophy. You're going to be asked to think critically about this text, available at the City Bookstore, or available on Amazon, or available online in any number of forms for about $10. I picked this one up at Barnes & Noble for about $10, 10 years ago or something like that. You must read the book. If you don't read the book, you will fail the class. If you try to get by with Spark Notes, if you try to make your way through the class by talking to others or by just doing what you can to skate through, you won't pass. It's too hard, the material is too difficult, and I'm going to be talking to you individually quite a bit. You must develop an understanding of the text, and you must read. If you don't like to read, or if you're not going to read, sometimes we do things we don't like for a higher good. If you're not going to read, then don't take the class. If you're not willing to write about what you've read, don't take the class. Make sure that you understand these things in order to develop a proper relationship between yourself and your education over the next 6 weeks, and especially with me. I do not take these things lightly. This is a difficult class, but it's a different type of class than you might be used to. I'm not going to be asking you to regurgitate, at least not usually, and not only. I'm going to be asking you to read, think, and respond. And the responses are going to be public. They're going to be shared with the rest of the class. They're not going to be private papers between you and me, but they will be in discussion forums. And they will, over the course of the 6 weeks, give you a fairly thorough understanding of this one book. And it is just one book. It's a 2,400-year-old text written by Plato, a Greek philosopher who lived in Athens 2,400 years ago, 2,300 years ago. And that forms the backbone of a great deal of our intellectual foundations today, even today. It's a very important book, and understanding it will give you a very good understanding of the foundations of the West, foundations of Western philosophy, the foundations of Western thought, the foundations of Western science even, and the foundations of Western politics. You must read it in order to do well in this class. I can't emphasize that enough. But when I say you must read it, I don't just mean that you must paper over it. You must read it critically. You must think about it. And that is something that quite a few of you are not used to doing. And therefore, you will have to learn it. That can be a painful thing, but I can't say this enough. It is an incredibly rewarding thing. If you don't already know how to read, and I say that choosing my words carefully, but if you do not already know how to read, this class will teach you. And of course, I don't mean knowing how to read a letter and how letters make up words. Primarily, I mean knowing and understanding how sentences make up paragraphs and how paragraphs make up arguments, or how sentences make up arguments. This book is full of arguments, and in order to understand it, you must develop a capacity to analyze and create your own arguments. So a lot of the class is just about that process, the process of argument development and argument analysis. You will see in the course description that we will deal with quite a bit of content throughout the course of the class. And of course, we will do that. We'll talk also about Aristotle, we'll talk about Ayer, we'll talk about a whole bunch of other philosophers. Our base will always be Plato and Plato's Republic. But even more generally than that, the important thing is that you get comfortable with arguments. That's what everything is about in this class. So I'm going to be asking you to not just read, but to read with a critical, analytical approach. And that means that as you get started, that means that you need to develop a plan for reading in as quiet an environment as you can find, and in such a way that you can take notes while you read. If you do not take notes while you read, even if it's just a matter of doing what I tend to do, which is this sort of thing, writing in the margins or writing in the spaces in between sentences. If you're not doing that, you're not going to capture as much as you can out of the book. I'm going to give you access to a lot of resources. SparkNotes is one of them. And those resources are sometimes very good, but they just do not make up for your experience of reading something, being confused by it, rereading it, being confused still, asking a question about it, getting an answer, going back to the text, reading it a third time, understanding it, and making a connection between you and the idea. That is intellectual development. If you're not into that, if you don't want to do that, don't take the class. Okay, so what am I asking you to read? First, I do recommend, even though I didn't write this down anywhere, I do recommend that you start with this. This is the timeline, the world of Plato and the Republic. It just helps to have that timeline because it's just a short history of Greece at the time of the Republic's development, both before and after. And you'll see some familiar words here. You'll see the word marathon, for example. You might wonder what that means, what the word marathon means. Look it up. You have the web at your disposal. I expect you to use it in a way that enhances your own learning. You might recognize this word, Thermopylae. If you're a fan of movies, then you might recognize it as a reference in the 300. You'll recognize the name Leonidas if you remember 300. And of course, you'll recognize Sparta. Salamis is another reference that you might recognize. Socrates makes his first appearance here. Pericles. Pericles was a famous Athenian leader. Anaxagoras, Protagoras, some of the early pre-Socratic philosophers. There are references here to a fellow named Sophocles, who was a tragedian, writer who wrote tragedies. There are references here to the death of Socrates. You'll want to become familiar with the death of Socrates. In fact, I recommend that you all read The Life and Death of Socrates, usually a collection of 4 or 5 dialogues, which I can link you to. Pretty good stuff. Dionysus of Syracuse. You might recognize the name Syracuse, but probably not in the context in which you're used to seeing it. Syracuse. Dion, Dionysus II, etc., etc. It's quite a bit of history. After you read the timeline, go on to the introduction. Become familiar with the basic elements of the book. The introduction is written by the editor of this text, who is Elizabeth Watson Scharfenberger. She did not write the translation. The translation is by Benjamin Jowett, who put that translation together about 120 years ago. Translation is okay. It's not the best translation that you can find. In fact, if I were to recommend a single translation, I would probably recommend this one, Alan Bloom's. Better translation, but harder. Harder for the beginning student to read. And as you can see, I have comments all throughout this text. It's a very well-worn copy. It's an excellent text. And it has a better introduction to the Republic than what you'll find here. But I like this because A, it's cheap. It's $8, I think, at City Campus, maybe $10 now. And actually, Bloom's translation should only be about $20 on Amazon. And it is relatively easy to read. There are some sections where Jowett does damage to the original Greek text, and that's unfortunate. Bloom is much better a translator, but that's okay. That's okay. If you want to read Bloom, read Bloom. Doesn't matter to me. Just get the book and get it quickly. Whatever you do, you must have the following in your copy. Now, I'm willing to put up with quite a bit in terms of your access to the correct materials. What you cannot do is miss the following. Look in the margins. Do you see that page number? You should see page 479. You go later into the text, you should see, let's see, oops, I'm in the index. There, you're seeing other page numbers, and in this case, you're also seeing letters. Those page numbers and letters are the way that we talk about the Republic. So if I tell you, look at page 429A, I need you to know where to look. If you don't have those margin pages, then you won't know where to look. See that? You must be able to talk to me through those margin pages. So it's not going to do you any good to have a text where page 392A happens to appear on page 83 of your book. I don't know anything about that, especially if you're not using this approved version. I must be able to talk to you by using those margin pages. Those page numbers are called Stephanus pagination. And they get that name from the fellow who designed the pagination system that we use for Plato today. Basically, it's just a way to use the same page numbers no matter what translation you're using. So you must have that. No matter which version of this you buy, you must have those margin numbers, or you will be absolutely and totally lost in this class. Okay, start reading. Make sure you go into the introductory forum and post your introduction. I need that in order to know who I'm dealing with. Think real hard after you read the syllabus especially. Think real hard about whether this class is for you. You must be a fan of reading, thinking, and writing. If you can't do those things, or you won't do those things, you would do yourself a disservice by staying in the class. Okay, thank you very much. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to call, write, or come see me.